And we are back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world today. We are live from Las Vegas at AWS reInvent 2024. Give me a woohoo! Woohoo! And you look behind us, we got 60,000 of our closest friends back there. And we're at the expo floor for the first ever Industries Live broadcast. And I am one of your co-hosts, Chris Niederman, head of AWS Industries and Solutions within our partner organization, joined with
Addy Dubhashi. I'm part of the industry solutions team, and I work with our partners across technology, consulting, building those line of business solutions that can apply to our financial services customers. And with us is Neo4j, Michael.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Michael Down. I head up our financial services technology, which is basically my role to make the magic happen within the banks. Been here at Neo now coming up to 3 years. Before that, did the same role at Elastic, where we flattened the data, versus now building these amazing graphs. And then before that, I spent time at Barclays running around the bank solving problems. So it's great to be here.
I like that. You make the magic happen. Okay, T-shirts made. We make the magic happen at the banks.
Yeah. And so one of the fascinating bits about Neo4j is it kind of breaks open the concept of the graph, right? You're the leader in the space, a massive presence and incumbency within the large institutions. Tell us a little bit about Neo4j, graph databases at large, just for the audience to kind of get an overview.
Yeah, sure. So like graph as a concept has been around since the 1800s, right? But when you think about graph databases and now knowledge graphs, which we're hearing a lot about, especially with Gen AI, this new kind of revolution of storing our data in a totally different way is providing incredible power for the banks. And so as a graph database, we think about relationships, this context of data, which before you stick either in a NoSQL database or you're sticking in a relational database, but there's no context of that idea of those things being linked. And so at Neo4j, for us, it's about linking data, and that strong idea that in the concept of finance, that a person has an account, and that account has transactions. And so modeling that data provides incredible insight, which we can go into.
And the interesting thing, right, and Chris, if you're not a big fan of graph databases, I wasn't until I understood Neo4j, it's the way our brain works. Right? It's when I have to think about something, I'm kind of saying, all right, how does that connect to that other thing? So it's a point, which is the dot, and then it's the line that joins it up, and that entire network is kind of how the brain functions. So when I saw graph databases at first, I was thinking about it as, is this a complicated subject? But it just made so many ideas and concepts so easy to understand. And that's why there's so much adoption of graph databases in financial institutions. They're kind of finding the relationships in the data, whether that's through fraud and financial crime, whether that's customer recommendation and 360 scenarios in banking and capital markets. Michael, what are you seeing happen in the financial services space with Neo4j?
Yeah, so for us, like our first introduction, and so this is the thing I find amazing about technology and finances. When you think about banking, like what's the most important thing to a bank? Like transactions. If you're talking about retail banking, it's transactions and customers. And so the first use case we kind of get really used for, and I think this has been, we've been so used to kind of breaking data down, flattening data. And so when people now think about adopting a graph, that idea of sending money, right, me sending you money, and the way that that's kind of built and modeled in a graph makes total sense. And so the first big use case we actually get used for, which you think is quite amazing, is fraud. Right? Because of the way that we model the movement of money, which blows my mind. Like the use cases we're doing in both real-time and transaction monitoring is insane. But the bit I love is you start to see the penny drop. Like, and we have this concept at Neo, like once you see a graph, you see graphs everywhere.
Yeah, that happened with me. That happened with me.
But we, as humans, we are very good at pattern recognition. And a graph is exactly that. We will show you a pattern, right? Whether that be fraud, whether that be liquidity, whether that be trade settlements, right? They're all patterns. And yeah, it's insane. You give that to the analyst for the first time and they see this like money mule. I'll tell you a story. We went into a bank in the UK and we went to see the fraud team. And when I say fraud team, these were the guys and girls who were going out, not inside the bank. They were going out and finding these criminals. They're all ex kind of, policing, etc.
Right.
And they came in and they said, look, we've just found this criminal network which has taken us, we've been doing this and working with the governments, etc. for over a year. And he said, do you want to see the network? And I'm like, yeah, brilliant, show me the network, it's awesome. And he came out, I don't know how he got this printed, but it was like a roll of wallpaper. And he rolled this thing out, and it must have been at least 6 to 10 feet long. And it knitted together this criminal network. Oh. And he said, okay, where's that data? And he's like, oh, it's in a relational database. But why, I was like, why are you modeling it here then as a graph?
Yeah.
And this is when, because it makes sense. It's easy to understand, right? Understanding these patterns and connections between two criminals you never thought were connected, but suddenly they either, they're part of the same company, or they've sent money to each other, or they're, 4 degrees of separation, suddenly that's all there.
And the interesting part is, like, even if you see a movie or James Bond scene, you're going to see that when they're trying to show the globe and something happened as a rig, you actually show them as graph databases.
Yeah.
You're actually showing dots and lines, or bring it all together.
You just made me think of like those movies where you got a wall of like yarn from this to this to this and pictures everywhere.
That's
then
it.
My head's about to explode. But this is the easy button.
Exactly.
For this.
Exactly. So I'm going to go slightly off topic, although I know we're here to talk about financial services. We went in and we were working with policing. And we got taken into this room, and there was this screen, and it must have been 30 foot high. It was massive, right? And it was like the government's knock. And it was powered by the graph to connect all these things together, right? And when we talk about policing, it's like, well, how do fraudsters and everything, it's all about money. Again, so they were knitting together policing and financial transactions to understand, again, these networks.
And,
right?
and the interesting part is, right, even our understanding of these, right, when we're putting those lines in, joining them up, our brains have a capacity and a limit, but graph databases do not. They're able to parse through history. They're able to parse through circular rings in which any fraud can occur. So where historically, fraud occurs when, they're kind of put a party in between and transferring something that shouldn't be done. But these institutions are constructing ways to really make sure that they're protecting their customers by applying graph databases. How are you seeing this? Any examples and case studies that you've kind of had with AWS in this space?
Yeah, so we've got, obviously, with AWS, we've got a reference architecture out that we're both kind of working on with regards to kind of that adoption. We have organizations like NatWest. We've got, a number of organizations here, JPMC, who are all using AWS as the core, right? And again, their first transition is normally fraud, right? Because it's the transactions. And then we get into liquidity analytics and other fraud parts. And this is where then the fraud kind of comes in. So you think of fraud as multiple different kind of business lines, right? You've got real-time fraud, transaction monitoring, AML, KYC. Fundamentally, they're all talking about transactions and people. And it's just like that additional piece of information that then brings another context, right? And it's insane to see then that kind of trickle effect. And for us, what we're building, we want the organizations to have is this like data asset, right? Unlike kind of out-the-box solutions, we are a capability. And we want you to be able to use it in multiple ways. And this was the example of one bank who started with fraud in the UK, built an amazing transaction monitoring system to replace the likes of Actimize and other tooling. And the next minute, it was used for liquidity analytics to understand, like, where is the money going? Why is the money leaving the bank, right? And this was all because of the Silicon Valley Bank incident. And obviously, basically, liquidity, where did it go?
Yep.
And next minute, they're using a fraud system to build and understand where that money is going to and how can they then protect the bank or provide the right services to retain that liquidity inside the organization.
And it's such a massive space because many CIOs and CTOs, they have to focus on false flagging. So when you're running systems like these, you often have a challenge of too many flags saying, well, I think I found something that's fraud. I think I found something that's not accurate. But that also overwhelms the system because you just don't know the connections are actually accurate or not. And so the human being in the process is overwhelmed, unsure which one's the actual flag and which is not. And so graph databases really help here. And when it seamlessly spins up, it makes their life easier.
Totally. And so the thing, if you like, take away is like, when I joined Neo4j, and obviously coming from my banking experience, and I was told with a graph, it's the only database where you can ask for a shape of something. So you think about, we all talk about data as a shape, right? Like things are connected, we've got this flow, in our case, money or trade settlement or whatever it may be. And you can ask it, you don't need to tell it where to start. Unlike a NoSQL database, you say, right, I need you to start with this key, or a relational database is exactly the same. I have to hit that index. Neo4j, you can say, this is what fraud looks like. This is what transactional fraud looks like. Go and find me anything that matches this shape. I'm not telling you where to start. You go find it for me.
Yeah.
And this is where we're starting to either augment or replace these kind of legacy systems that are backed by relational databases because they don't scale. And you can't ask this question. And you look at regulatory change that's been driven into the industry to protect us from fraud, and it's getting so much cleverer. And you look at what's happening in order to kind of stay up with this. And there was one bank, and their transaction monitoring system fires 14,000 alerts a month, right? Because they have very rigid, if you see this, do that, right? And what they haven't got is context. They haven't got this behavioral understanding of, like, do I send that money to that? One of the examples is to a high-risk jurisdiction, right? If I send money to a high-risk jurisdiction, that will get flagged, right? But if I send money to a high-risk jurisdiction every month, give or take the same day, give or take the same amount, like, is that anomalous now, or is that normal behavior for me? Like, the first couple of times you're going to be like, wait a second, Michael hasn't done this. But by the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, when do you go, actually, this is now normal for Michael. And this is the big thing the graphs are bringing, is this context awareness,
Yes.
which then feeds into all Gen AI and other
and that
capabilities.
context is so important, because that's what drops those false flags, right? It clarifies that, saying that, well, this is normal, this is not abnormal, so let the system flow. But that same application applies in Customer 360. So personalized experiences are also a graph problem that gets solved so seamlessly. We basically have the possibility to say, all right, we seem to know what Chris likes to do, what Michael likes to do, and then we kind of say, all right, they're very similar in what they're trying to solve. And that's also then further extrapolated by Gen AI. Yep. What are you seeing and what upcoming in this space?
So the big one for the banks is around hyper-personalization, right? We want to be able to come to that person, talk to that person, how they are interacting with us. So for example, give you a very simple one. If I spend a lot of money on renewable energy and green and everything else, the last thing you want to recommend me is like to go and invest in certain, oil and gas or other things, even though they're going green and everything else. But there are certain patterns to my behavior that obviously if you were to recommend me a portfolio that matched my behavior, then it's like a no-brainer, right? And so what the banks are trying to do is, you've got large organizations who have investment banks, corporate banks, retail banks, and they are trying to bring all that data into one place. So you can imagine, I bank with NatWest. I go to open the app and I go in and it says, hello, Michael, and you ask a question. So the example is today, if you go and say, I've got fraud, okay, or I've got a problem with a transaction, it'll go like, which card? Is it a credit card or is it a debit card? It's like, well, I don't have any credit cards with you. Like, it's only going to be a debit card because I have a bank account. And so the idea of the graph is now bringing all of this context of Michael's accounts and loans and mortgages, maybe in other parts, in the investment banking side, to then bring this context so that we can then create, as everyone wants to get to, this hyper-personalized view, because we want to provide that the executive banking experience to everybody.
Yeah.
And you look at some of the advancements happening, like Alibaba with Alipay is insane for this, right? Because of the way that they've connected like Alipay to the Ant Fund and other ways of doing this, they have just merged the two things together. And this is what the banks are trying to do with all the legacy tech and with everything else, is we're not going to be replacing the mainframes anytime soon. So how do we augment them with new technology where we're still going to run the banks on this technology, right? But how do we then work with the likes of yourselves and with Neo4j, where we can start to bring Bedrock and Gen AI and then Neo4j as a partner, and then have this ecosystem where there's going to be a transition and all these capabilities. So it's really interesting. Yeah. But this hyper-personalization and also addressing youth is where all of the kind of the focus is.
We got two questions from online viewers.
Yep.
So let's take one from Steven. Neo4j, have you considered application to public blockchain analysis?
Yes. So this is one of the things that we're, again, back to the fraud use case, that people are very quickly kind of cotting on to is when for fraudsters, what they're doing is they're just like, right, instead of me now sending you money and we're part of like a, fraud ring, what I'll do is instead of me connecting you, I'm going to jump into the blockchain, fire around a few transactions, and suddenly somewhere else it's going to pop out back into your account, right? And so there's this concept we've been working on with organizations, and this is where, like, depending on who the organization is, a bank can only see their transactions, right? If I am NatWest, if I'm HSBC, if I'm Citi, I only see myself, right? But this is why we also work with card providers and merchants and like Swift and MasterCard and Visa, etc., because they don't know who I am, but they now know where all the money moves. And so you look at some of the legislation that's happening around APP, anti-push payments, which is new fraudulent. This idea then of like the blockchain, like, it's insane, because you can then say, right, as soon as we get the ability to say, right, we've seen Michael go into this blockchain account, and we know that this other criminal has gone into this other blockchain address. Can we find any way of getting between these two addresses? You go work it out. It's an incredible use case.
Fascinating.
Awesome.
And I think there's another aspect of it, right, which is these are the line of business challenges that we can solve for in financial services. But there's also the day-to-day aspects of allowing the breadth of data that they have just to all come together, applying graphs. We're seeing so many interesting applications coming from customers where they're saying unstructured data sitting in this part of our bank, and then we want to combine that with other data. How does the graph help with kind of bringing AI and Gen AI components towards fully assessing and addressing the data repositories that they own.
Yeah, so this is interesting. You look at the legislation that's coming out and the rigor on understanding, not from a customer perspective of what's happening and who's Michael, etc., but more from a system perspective. Now, which systems are dependent on other systems? If that system was to go down, which is like online banking or a trade settlement system, well, what does that then impact? And the flow of data, and we're seeing some really innovative use cases. That the actual first use case is like, with NatWest, for an example, they're a massive AWS user, right? And they use an incredible amount of your tools, but getting and democratizing that data is critical for opening it up and allowing people who are in the business line who may not necessarily understand what the data is, like what is a table, how do I write SQL, but suddenly then being able to say like, okay, show me liquidity that goes to a fintech. Boom. You're just going to go straight into transactions, look at the payments, categorize the fintechs. Right, I can tell you top 5 is X, Y, Z. And so this data and data quality, which we're hearing a lot about, is crucial, but also the flow of data. And so we have partners in the room here today who use Neo4j under the hood for data lineage, right? And we have a great strong use case again together where we have organizations building that understanding of where does data go, how does it move, when you then, for many use cases around data democratization, but also when the regulator goes, can you prove where that number came from? When you're reporting trades, etc., you just go in and say, can you show me where that data came from? And boom, with one question.
Super cool. So we got a couple minutes left, and I got 2 maybe obscure questions for you.
Go for it.
First off, maybe it's not so obscure. What's the coolest thing you've seen all week? Announcements, meeting, what is it?
Yeah, well, obviously being in the knowledge graph space, yesterday sitting there in the amazing room, it's my first time actually in Las Vegas, first time here, which blew my mind. Just sitting in that room alone was incredible. But then seeing on the stage, talking about knowledge bases and knowledge graphs and the concept of knowledge and the way that we are now using it, it's incredible, because Neo4j has been on this journey for a long time, 14 years, and now we're seeing this hype of knowledge, and that was to see that on stage.
It's coming your way,
exactly,
right?
And it's a tipping point. It's a massive tipping point in the industry. The graphs have been the answer, but now there's a breadth of understanding that's really taking shape.
Really interesting. And then where did the name come from?
Neo4j, yeah. So, like any startup, right, you've got to have this kind of wacky name. And Neo4j was because when the founders were kind of creating the company, they all loved the Matrix. So Neo is Neo from the Matrix. Cypher is Cypher from the Matrix, right? And so yes, that's where the name came from. The 4J was because it was written in 4 Java. But yes, there you go.
Your symbol is a little rabbit, right? Follow the white rabbit.
Follow the white rabbit.
So bring us home.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think something that I really kind of caught from this excellent set of case studies you shared, Michael. There's so much to do here. There's business cases and use cases we apply. We also are able to really combine our capabilities. And Neo4j is a financial services competency partner. You're working towards and building solutions that are listed on Marketplace. Neo4j has actually published a series of architectures around fraud and fraud detection upon blogs as well as on Marketplace as well. But what really excites us is how this is all coming together. The possibilities that Neo4j can do, the consulting ecosystems that kind of shape their capabilities around you, and all of it on AWS, kind of making it really easy for a line of business buyers to solve those problems seamlessly and kind of drive value to their business in a very rapid way. So thank you for joining us. I think this has been excellent as a specific session. And just kind of closing us out, please join us in this series as we do it every Tuesday at 8 a.m. PST. And this series is going to go all throughout 2025, and this is just the start. So log in to kind of understand all of those multi-party
Keep coming
plays.
back. We're going to hit many industries.
Absolutely. So many more.
And what's up next? We join us for tagline trivia. We got another game coming up.
That should be fun.
That's the next
Absolutely.
one. Well, it depends how you define fun, but it's going to be interesting. That's for sure. But this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Michael, appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us, folks.